I'm writing this because I have no other way to speak. The police report just says aggravated assault. They don't understand. They can't. Before all this, my voice was my life. It was more than my life. It was my purpose. Every day, I'd find a corner in this sprawling, indifferent city, and I would preach. I'm a young man, and I know how it looks. Some people would scoff, others would hurry past, but some would listen. I never shouted fire and brimstone. I spoke of hope, of finding light in the cracks of this concrete jungle. My voice was a bell. It was strong, resonant, a gift I believed was given to me to share. I could feel the words vibrate in my chest, a physical force I could project across a busy square, cutting through the traffic and the noise to reach a person who needed to hear it. That feeling, it was like being truly alive. That all ended a month ago. It was a Tuesday. I finished late, my throat raw, but my spirit soaring. I'd had a good day. A few people had stopped to talk, to share their burdens. I was walking home, taking a shortcut I'd taken 100 times before. It's a narrow alley, poorly lit, that spits you out a block from my apartment building. It always felt like a little secret passage, a moment of quiet between the roar of the main street and the hum of my residential block. That night, the quiet was different. It was heavy, predatory. He was just a shape in the deepest part of the shadow, halfway down the alley. I only saw him when I was almost on top of him. My first thought was of a homeless man, and my hand instinctively went to my wallet, not out of fear, but to give him what little cash I had. "God bless you, brother," I started to say. The words died in my throat. He wasn't a homeless man. He was wrong. Gone is the word, but it doesn't do him justice. It was like his skin was a size too big for the bones beneath, stretched tight over a frame that seemed impossibly thin. His eyes were just pits of shadow in the dim light. There was a smell, too, like damp, turned earth and old paper. He moved faster than I could react. One moment, he was a shape. The next, his hand was clamped on my arm. It was shockingly cold, a dead, bloodless cold that seeped right through my jacket. I did what anyone would do. I opened my mouth and I screamed. It was a good, solid scream, born of pure terror, full of all the power I put into my sermons. It should have echoed off the brick walls and brought people running. But it wasn't. The man, this stick figure of a person, didn't flinch. He didn't try to silence me. Instead, he leaned in, his face inches from mine. And as I screamed, he did something I still can't comprehend. He inhaled. It wasn't a normal breath. It was a deep, rattling, impossible inhalation, a vacuum. I felt it. I felt my voice, the very sound and force and vibration of it, being pulled from my lungs, torn from my throat. It was a physical sensation, like a string being yanked from the core of my being. The scream thinned, wavered, and then nothing. It was just gone. My mouth was still open, my lungs were still heaving, but there was no sound. Only a terrifying, profound silence where my voice should have been. The man straightened up, a flicker of something like satisfaction in his shadowy eyes. He didn't take my wallet. He didn't touch me again. He just released my arm, turned, and melted back into the shadows at the end of the alley. I stood there for a long time, trying to call for help, trying to make any sound at all. I could breathe, I could cough, but the part of me that made noise was just gone. It was like trying to flex a phantom limb. The machinery was there, but the signal wasn't connecting. The first few days were a blur of panicked visits to doctors and specialists. I carried a small notepad and a pen everywhere. I was mugged. I screamed and my voice just stopped. They looked at me with pity. An ENT specialist threaded a camera down my nose and into my throat. He showed me the monitor. "Look," he said, pointing. "Vocal cords are perfect. No ceiling, no paralysis, no nodes. Physically, there is absolutely no reason you shouldn't be able to speak." They gave it a name: conversion disorder, severe psychological trauma manifesting as a physical symptom. My mind, they said, had been so shocked by the attack that it had switched my voice off to protect me. It was a plausible, scientific explanation. It made sense to everyone but me. I went to my mentors, the older preachers who had guided me. I sat in a heavy oak chair in a quiet study, the air thick with the smell of old books, and scribbled my story onto a legal pad. They read it, their faces etched with concern. "The enemy works in many ways, my son," one of them said, his own voice a comforting baritone. "He seeks to silence the messengers of the Lord." This was a traumatic event. The shock has stolen your tongue for a time. You must have faith. Pray. Rest. Let God heal your mind, and your voice will return. Psychological. Everyone agreed. I was the victim of a violent crime, and my mind had broken in a specific, unusual way. I tried to believe them. I really did. I prayed. I rested. I filled notebooks with my silent sermons, with my desperate pleas to God. But I knew what I had felt. It wasn't my mind breaking. It was a theft. I felt the void inside my chest where the resonance used to be. It was a hollow space, an emptiness that ached with silence. Life became a quiet nightmare. The world felt like it was behind a pane of glass. I couldn't work. I couldn't preach. I couldn't even order a coffee without the awkward dance of pointing and writing. I was a ghost in my own life, my very identity ripped away from me. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever experienced. Then, exactly 1 week after the attack, the real horror began. I was in my apartment, trying to read. The window was open, letting in the night air and the distant sounds of the city. At first, it was just a murmur, a sound on the edge of hearing. I almost dismissed it as a car radio or a passing argument. But there was something about the cadence, something familiar. I went to the window and leaned out, listening. The sound rose and fell, carried on the wind. And then I heard it clearly, a single phrase echoing from a few streets over. "And I tell you, your neighbor's compassion is a weakness you can exploit." I froze. A cold sweat prickled my entire body. It was my voice. There was no mistaking it. It was my pitch, my timbre, my particular way of drawing out certain vowels when I was making a point. It was the voice I had used every day to speak of love and forgiveness. But the words were poison. They were a vile, twisted mockery of everything I had ever preached. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the building, my heart hammering against my ribs. I sprinted down the street, chasing the sound. It seemed to be coming from a small park 2 blocks away. But by the time I got there, breathless and frantic, there was nothing. Just a few people walking their dogs, a couple on a bench. The park was quiet. The voice was gone. I tried to tell myself I was hallucinating. Auditory hallucination, a symptom of the trauma. That's what the doctors would say. My mind was playing tricks on me, creating a phantom of my lost voice. It made sense. But the next night, it happened again. This time it was closer. It sounded like it was coming from the rooftop of the building across the street. I stood at my window, listening, my blood turning to ice. Look upon the desperate and see not a soul to be saved, but a tool to be used. Their hope is a currency, and you should spend it freely. It was my voice, but it was being used to preach a gospel of pure, undiluted evil. It spoke of selfishness as a virtue, of cruelty as a strength. It was a sermon from hell, delivered with the same passionate, convincing tone I had once used to bring comfort to the lost. I watched the rooftop for half an hour, but saw no one. The voice just preached its filth into the night air, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, it stopped. Every night after that, it got closer. One night, it was from the alley behind my building. The next, it was from the street corner right below my window. I'd rush down, but there was never anyone there. It was a ghost. I was starting to unravel. I wasn't sleeping. I'd sit in the dark, by the window, waiting, dreading the moment I'd hear myself start to speak. My friends and mentors from the church would check in on me. I try to explain, scribbling frantically on my notepad. I can hear my voice. Someone is using it. It's saying terrible things. They'd share those same looks of pity. It's the trauma, they'd say gently. Your mind is trying to process what happened. Perhaps it's a manifestation of your anger, of your fear. They thought I was losing my mind. And to be honest, I was starting to believe them. Was this my new reality? Trapped in silence, haunted by a twisted version of myself? Last night, I decided I couldn't live like that. Crazy or not, I had to confront it. When the voice started up closer than ever before, seemingly from the very same alley where I'd lost it, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the heaviest flashlight I owned and went out to face my ghost. The alley looked exactly the same, and the voice, it was here. It was loud, bouncing off the walls, a torrent of beautiful, persuasive, horrific words. For true power lies not in lifting others up, but in the certainty that you can push them down. It was coming from the far end of the alley. And as I crept closer, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the gloom, I saw him. It was the same gaunt man, the same scarecrow figure. He wasn't alone. He had someone cornered, a young woman pressed back against the brick wall. She was staring up at him, her eyes wide, but not with terror. It was more like fascination. She was mesmerized. The voice was pouring out of him, but his lips weren't moving in sync with the words. It was like a badly dubbed movie. The sound, my sound, was emanating from his chest, a perfect, seamless broadcast of my stolen voice, twisted to his purpose. My blood ran cold, but then a different fire ignited in its place. Righteous anger, the kind of fire I used to channel into my sermons. I am a shepherd, and this was a wolf among the flock. He saw me then. The flashlight beam caught his face, and his hollow eyes locked onto mine. The voice cut off abruptly, plunging the alley into a sudden, shocking silence. The woman blinked, as if waking from a dream, and a flicker of real fear finally crossed her face. The gaunt man tilted his head. He didn't seem surprised to see me. A dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement, escaped his throat. It might have been a chuckle. Then he spoke, and this time, the voice was his own. It was a whisper. You came back. The fire in you is strong. It seasons the sound. He knew. He was talking to me, but he seemed to understand my silent questions. I took a step forward, raising the flashlight like a club. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I couldn't let him hurt that woman. You wonder how? He rasped, his eyes never leaving mine. It's a gift. I take the instruments of conviction. The preacher's sermon, the politician's promise, the lover's whisper. I drink the sound, and I use the leftover faith to draw them in. He gestured with his chin toward the woman, who was now trembling. They hear a voice they want to believe. They come closer. Their walls come down. It makes the rest so much easier. I had no voice to shout a warning. I had no words to condemn him. All I had was my conviction. In a single, desperate motion, I did the only thing I could. I threw myself at him. I'm not a big man, and he was unnaturally strong, but the surprise of the attack was enough. I slammed into him, and we both went down in a tangle of limbs. Run! I mouthed at the woman, a silent, desperate scream. For a second, she was frozen, and then her survival instinct kicked in. She scrambled away, her footsteps echoing down the alley as she fled into the night. I felt a flash of triumph. It was short-lived. The thief threw me off him with an effortless, terrifying strength. I landed hard against the brick wall, the air knocked out of me. Before I could recover, he was on top of me, one of his cold, skeletal hands wrapped around my throat. He leaned down, his face once again inches from mine. The foul, earthy smell was overwhelming. A pointless gesture, he hissed, his voice a dry rustle in the dark. Your flock has scattered, and the shepherd is about to be devoured. His grip tightened, and I felt my consciousness start to slip. He was laughing, that same dead leaf sound, and then he opened his mouth. I will see it in my nightmares for the rest of my life, however long that may be. It wasn't a mouth anymore. It stretched, unhinged, widened, the flesh pulling and distorting in a way that defied all physics, all biology. It kept opening wider and wider, until his entire head seemed to be nothing but a gaping maw, a perfect circle of absolute, starless black. It was a hole in the world. I could hear a faint, high-pitched ringing coming from it, a sound that seemed to pull at the very edges of my soul. He was lowering this void down over my face, and I knew, with a certainty that went beyond terror, that he was going to consume me. Not just my body, but everything I was. And then, a sound of a siren cut through the darkness. It started faint and far away, but it grew louder, closer, wailing through the night. The thief froze. The black hole of his mouth receded, snapping back into the shape of a thin, bloodless line. A look of pure annoyance crossed his gaunt features. With a final contemptuous hiss, he released my throat, scrambled to his feet, and was gone. He didn't run. He just faded into the deepest shadows at the end of the alley and vanished. I lay there, gasping, dragging in ragged, silent breaths, as the police car screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. The woman I'd saved had found them. Of course, they didn't believe the real story. They found me battered and bruised, and the victim hysterical. To them, it was just a mugging gone wrong, an attempted assault. The woman tried to explain about the voice, about how she felt like she was in a trance, but they just nodded and wrote it down as a symptom of shock. When they asked me for my statement, all I could do was pull out my little notepad. They called in a psychologist from the Victim Services Unit. They were kind, they were professional, and they were completely useless. So here I am. My throat is bruised, but the doctors say I'll be fine. Physically, my voice has not returned. I know it won't. It's still out there with him. I'm writing this because I'm a preacher, and a preacher's job is to spread the word. This is my new pulpit. This is my new sermon. That thing is still out there. He's hunting in my city, and he's using my voice to do it. He might be hunting in yours too. So please, I beg you, listen. If you're walking home at night and you hear a voice from a dark street, a voice that sounds impossibly trustworthy, impossibly convincing, a voice that speaks of hope but makes you feel a creeping dread, run. Don't listen. Don't let the words take root, because it might be a politician's promise or a lover's whisper, or it might be mine. That should be the end, right? That neat little moral, my borrowed voice folded back into a warning. But I can't stop there. I owe you more than a warning. I owe you the smell of the alley when my lungs tried to catch up to the silence. I owe you the tick in my left eyelid that hasn't stopped since. I owe you the arguments with the people who love me and the strangers who wanted to fix me. Because this isn't a story about one bad night. It's a story about the days after, when evil keeps its receipts and sends you copies. They discharged me with a packet, breathing exercises, grounding techniques, numbers for hotlines. I put the paper on my kitchen table and stared at it like it might start singing. My apartment sounded wrong. You don't realize how much of your own life is the noise you make until it's gone. No hum of a throat clearing, no muttered prayer, no off-key humming while the kettle heats. Just the refrigerator clicking and the elevator cables in the shaft beyond the wall, dragging steel like a chain through a throat. I learned quickly that people need you to talk, so they can believe you're all right. When I handed the barista my index card, black marker, block letters, large coffee, room for milk, she smiled too hard and shouted. Of course, like I was deaf. She was kind, and I hated her for it. I hated the pity that softened a face. That's ugly, but it's true. Suffering makes you mean in small ways. You want someone else to carry the ugly with you. At church, they set a chair for me in the front pew. My mentors called me son more than usual. One of them clasped my shoulder and prayed long and loud, voice rolling and sweet. My chest hollowed further with each amen. Afterward, in a hall that smells like grape juice and old hymnals, a woman I'd counseled last spring, divorce, custody, sleeplessness, grabbed both my hands and squeezed. I know what you're going through, she said. I wanted to write, do you? Did something with hands like rakes pull the motor out of your soul and leave you watching your breath fog and do nothing? Instead, I wrote, thank you, and smiled. Nights stretched. Remember being a kid and hearing the house creak, and you learn the language of it. the radiators cluck, the stairs groan, the neighbor's toilet with the haunted pipes. Our building spoke like that. It told me stories so I wouldn't sleep. The elevator doors bump and sigh. The fourth floor couples muffled fighting. Then the reconciliation, the bed frame knocking like a fist on a coffin lid. The radiator spitting mineral ghosts. And when my chest got tight and my fingers tingled, I'd get on the floor and do the breathing the packet taught me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. Like I was inflating someone else's lungs. On the 7th night, because evil loves a pattern, the wind changed. It came off the river and threaded itself through the brick like a needle. With it came the sermon I never gave. Mercy is a leash the powerful tighten and loosen to watch the weak dance. My name was in it. That's how I knew I wasn't hallucinating. You use it the way I use a name to pull someone's eyes to mine. He dragged the syllables like you drag a chair across tile, loud enough to turn stomachs. I made mistakes after that. The first was chasing it. You already know I ran to the park and found nothing. What I didn't tell you, I left my door standing open. I went back an hour later and the apartment smelled wrong. Not like a person had been there. Like a basement. Like papers that got rained on once and never fully dried. My closet door stood ajar. Every shirt hung precisely where I left it. But I crouched on the floor and pressed my palm to a dark patch on the wooden baseboard, and my skin drank cold. The second mistake, I tried to record it. I set my cheap phone by the window on night number 8, the way you leave an open jar in a kitchen and hope the mouse crawls inside. The voice came off the rooftop across the street and slid into my room like a skilled thief stepping over a windowsill. You've been told the meek inherit the earth. Why would you want it? It's already spoiled. I watched the voice memo app tick up seconds. The waveform bobbed. I nearly laughed. Proof. I stopped recording. When I pressed play, the file was not my voice co-opted or his leaves in the wind chuckle. It was my breathing, not the slow, measured kind, the rabbit kind. And at the end, right before the clip cut, there was a crisp smack like 2 fingers snapping. I didn't make that sound. I went to the cops with the file, because people trust badges even when they shouldn't. The officer at the desk listened, head tilted. He had kind eyes. He turned the phone around so it faced me and hit play again. "That you?" he said. I nodded. "Have you seen a therapist?" I wanted to throw the phone. Instead, I wrote, "I saw a man inhale my scream. He stole my voice." He read it. He didn't laugh. He said, "Okay," in a way that meant not okay. He took my report like he was writing down a dream a kid had after a scary movie. "We'll keep an extra car in the area," he said. He didn't. Days crawled with my mouth buttoned shut. Little chores became obstacles you circle for hours. Calling the bank. Forget it. I walked there with a note. The teller read it and frowned and asked for ID out loud. I held up my ID. She asked again, louder. People do that. When you don't talk, they increase their volume like they're turning up the brightness on a dead screen. I found myself tapping my fingers on every surface. 4 taps, then 3, then 2, then 1. I don't know when it started. It felt like checking a lock. It felt like marking time in a jail with a plastic spoon. My mentor, call him Pastor Glenn, the baritone, started leaving me voicemails. He meant well. His voice filled the small rectangle like incense in a chapel. "Son, I want you to remember Exodus 14, verse 14. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." I wanted to hurl the phone into the sink and turn on the faucet and watch the bubbles rise. Be silent. Easy for him. His words didn't get pickpocketed by a skeleton in an alley. The voice came from new places. From a storm drain. From the cracked speaker of the intercom at the building's front door. From the elevator shaft itself while the car between floors creaked and moaned. Once, it vibrated through the metal grate of a sidewalk cellar so hard the soles of my shoes hummed. I stood there like an idiot and checked my pockets as if it might have slipped something back into me. The kindest thing you can do for a drowning man is step on his head. Quickens the lesson. I stopped drinking coffee. It made the buzzing in my arms worse. I switched to tea and burned my tongue on the first cup and couldn't swear about it, which made me want to throw the mug. I didn't. I pressed it to the inside of my wrist and let the heat find the thready pulse there like proof. If you're imagining I kept to myself, you're half right. I also started picking fights. It's embarrassing. I'd scribble something snide on the pad to the guy who blocked the subway stairs. Keep left like a fucking human. I wanted someone to push me so I could push back. I wanted to make noise without making sound. The pen dug grooves through the page into the paper below. Glenn didn't like it. He called me into his office and shut the door and folded his hands like something expensive and said, "You're letting rage speak for you." I wrote, "Rage has a voice." "I don't." He said, "The things pastors say, the good things, the right things." I tried to meet his eyes. My eyes kept drifting to his throat when he swallowed. I watched the bob of it. I hated it. I hated every working machine in the room. I left and walked the long block home and practiced not punching brick. On night 10, I met the dispatcher, not the siren in the alley, her predecessor. Young woman, hair in a bun too tight. I was in the bodega at the corner buying batteries for the flashlight I hadn't used yet and cat food I didn't need because I don't have a cat. I don't know why I picked up the cat food. Maybe I wanted to imagine something smaller than me would depend on me again. She came in looking hungover on sleep. Uniform shirt rumpled, eyes like a long highway. She held her phone, and my voice came through it loud as a bell. "You there buy the peppers pretending to read labels? God sees you. You could be more." I dropped the cat food. It hit the tile and dented. The owner said something sharp in his first language. The dispatcher's thumb hovered over the phone, then jabbed pause. "You okay?" she asked me. The kind eyes again. I nodded. I wrote, "Where did you get that?" "From the air," she said, and smiled without humor. "From the wind. It was on my fire escape when I woke up. A voice. This voice." She shook the phone. "It's a good voice. You recorded it." I shook my head hard enough to make my neck click. I wrote, "It's mine." She blinked. Her eyes traveled over my throat, the bruising yellow still fading there. Something said in her face like wet cement hardening. "Right," she said, "and you can't." I shook my head again. I wrote, "No sound." She bit her lip. She looked at the owner, who was pointedly not looking at us while cleaning a clean counter. "Okay," she said, "I don't have a lot of time. I gotta get back." "But," she held up her phone, "you want this?" I nodded. She handed it to me. I opened the voice memo app. The file was there, 312 long, titled with a timestamp and the word alley. I tapped play. I heard me say awful things in a cadence I developed over years like calluses. I heard a breath that was mine, but colder. I heard the dead leaf laugh at the edge. "If your neighbor begs, listen closely. He's not asking for help. He's offering you practice." I stopped it. My hand shook. The dispatcher looked at me the way you look at someone on a ledge who thinks the sidewalk is going to catch them like water. "You've never seen who's doing it?" she asked. I wrote, "I have. Once. The alley." I described him in fragments. Skin too big. Cold hands. Mouth like a pocket that never ends. She swallowed. "I'm supposed to report weird calls," she said. "I log sound anomalies. Half the time it's kids on a roof with a Bluetooth speaker. Half the time it's some guy in a van with a microphone and an axe to grind." Her voice dropped. "This isn't that, is it?" I shook my head. She exhaled. "Figures." She took her phone back, thumbed in a number. "I'm Cass," she said, almost as an afterthought. "If you hear it again, call me. Or text, I guess." She tapped her chest. "I believe you." I wanted to write, "Thank you," in letters big enough to cover the tile floor. Instead, I wrote, "Don't go alone." She smiled again, quick and slanted. "Friend, I get paid too little to be brave." She left. The owner finally picked up the cat food and set on the counter carefully, like a relic. I tried sleeping with the phone on my chest. I thought maybe the voice would be pulled to its little glass home the way a hornet crawls back into a bottle it already learned to hate. It didn't. The window whispered with the wind's tongue. I stared up at the hairline crack in my ceiling and counted the flecks of paint that clung like stubborn barnacles. I don't know when I fell into a dream, but when I did, it was a rerun, the alley, The gulp, the tug from my sternum, the stunned fish flopping of my vocal cords on a steel tray while a medical resident pretends this is normal. I woke with the taste of old pennies in my mouth. My phone screen was lit. A new memo had recorded itself. 006. I pressed play. There was no voice, mine or his. Just that high, thin ringing the mom made, barely audible like tinnitus that learned to flirt. You want me to get to the second alley? I will. But the gap between the first and second was a country I had to cross on torn feet. You don't turn from a victim into a hunter cleanly. You smear doubt and bravado all over yourself like war paint, and it runs with sweat. Cass texted the next afternoon. You hear it? I typed yes. Across ST roof. Then another bubble. Don't go. I stared at the two words until the screen dimmed. I went anyway, because I am a dumb animal with a personal myth about bravery. The roof door on my building has an alarm that's more threat than sound. I wedged it with a rock and climbed the last flight. The tar felt soft under my sneakers, the way a healing scab has give to it. The opposite roof looked exactly like mine. Silver ducks, rusted ladder, satellite dishes like dead moons. Nothing moved. I stood there like a scarecrow of my own and waited for my voice to arrive wearing someone else's suit. It didn't. It came 2 nights later from the alley that killed my voice, like he was keeping anniversaries. I took the flashlight this time, fresh batteries shaking in my fist, and I went down. Every brick on the alley walls was a calendar square with a red X on it. The dumpsters held their breath. A cat yowled far away, then shut up like it remembered something urgent. My steps scraped old gum. The air smelled wet and papery. My mouth flooded with saliva, so thin it might as well have been cold air. He was there. He doesn't sit or lean. He occupies space the way mildew does, so thoroughly you can't remember what it looked like without him. He had a young woman pinned with words. That's what he does. He corners the body, but he pins the mind. She wore a blue dress that made the alley crueler. Her hands hung at her sides like she'd forgotten what fingers are for. Power is keeping your hand on the switch and telling the room to make do with the dark. He turned when my light bit his face. His eyes were holes cut in paper. The voice stopped like a speaker unplugged mid-anthem. The woman's face reassembled itself wrong first. Shock, confusion. Then fear, the most honest version of her face. The rest, you know, the rush. The tackle, the dead hands, the mouth that unzipped reality, the siren, bless it, taking a corner too fast and screaming in mercy. But a lot happened in the seconds before the siren that I haven't written down. His fingers around my throat were not like human hands. They weren't only cold, they were quiet. You ever put your hand over a speaker to muffle a sound and feel the vibration flatten itself against your palm? That's what he did to my neck. Every tiny hum a body makes, that mosquito whine in your own ears, the click in your jaw, the wet pop when you swallow. It went away. He turned me into a TV on a dead channel, but without even the snow. And when he opened his mouth, the ring of nothing that came out pulled at the hair on my arms, sure, but it also pulled at memories. You ever lose a word and taste the outline of it on your tongue, and it bothers you for hours? Imagine that, but it's not a word. It's every story you told yourself about who you are. It tugged, and I felt a part of 8th grade, standing on the dugout roof sunburned and shouting a chant I thought was clever. Let go like a tooth. I felt the night my mother cried in the kitchen when I told her I wanted to preach, her fingers on the edge of the counter whitening, flicker like a light bulb. I held on to the thought of a man in the back row of the square last spring, the one with the beard who kept nodding, the one I later found crying on a bench. I wrapped myself around that one memory like a rope around a post in a flood. That's what saved what's left of me until the siren chased the dark back into its hole. I learned something important from that non-mouth. It doesn't just take sound, it takes story. It drinks the context around the sound the way a thirsty person sucks the last sweetness from an orange peel. It doesn't want your voice as an object. It wants your voice as a door to the house of you, and then it steals the furniture. The woman, the one in the blue dress, her name is Hannah. I learned that at the station in the bright lit box where they give you water in a paper cone and ask you to point at diagrams. She hugged me with bones and whispered, "If you pull me out." I nodded. I pulled her out of the tone that eats will. The officer with the kind eyes asked questions, and my pen scratched answers, and the fluorescent lights hummed like cheap choir. When I wrote down mouth like a hole, he stopped writing. He stared at his own hand like it betrayed him by stopping, then looked up and said, "You want to talk to someone? We have names." If this were one of the stories I used to tell on Sunday, parable, lesson, neat exit, I'd give you the arc where the truth finally convinces the men with badges, and they set up a sting and the gaunt man falls into a net, and they open his jaw and find my voice curled in there like a necklace. That's not what happened. What happened is a social worker gently wrote PTSD on a line and handed me a card for a sliding scale clinic. What happened is I went home with my stretched throat and my angry pen, and the sound of my name said in my own tone, echoing from somewhere I could not triangulate. I wonder if you're bored. There's the trap of trauma. It makes you want to tell every detail because the devil hides in the minor chords. I won't give you everything, but I'll give you enough to know this is not the story of a random demon and a random man. It's a story about how cities breed rooms made of sound, and something learned to drink those rooms dry. The clinic was in a building that used to be a sewing factory. The waiting room chairs have been sat on by 10,000 tired asses. The counselor's name was Dora. She said it softly, like she was afraid the name might break under its own syllables. She had hair the color of a pigeon and shoes that didn't squeak. She said, "We can work with conversion disorder. We can give your nervous system permission to lift the mute button." She mimed pressing a button on her own neck and smiled. She meant well. She had a poster of the vagus nerve on her wall, like a subway map. She taught me to gargle. She taught me to sing silently with my mouth open. She wanted to see my tongue tremble. She said, "You can desensitize your larynx with vibration." I held my throat like a broken instrument and tried not to cry. The last time I cried with sound, I was 16 and broke my wrist falling off a skateboard. There's a very particular sound boys make when they realize the pain won't stop in a minute. I miss that sound. Dora did EMDR with me. On movements like a metronome, thoughts like cars pulled one by one across a crossing. I followed her fingers and thought about alleys and sirens and holes. When she asked me to rate my fear, I held up both hands, all tens. She said, "It will come down." By the end of the session, I held up an 8, not because it had come down, but because I wanted to graduate. You would think I'd stop going after the second alley. I did not. I became a needle following the groove of my own bad record. Every night, I walked the block where the voices gather. I learned their haunts the way a street kid learns where a kind man will hand out sandwiches. I found the back door of the late-night Chinese place where the cooks smoke and speak softly. I found the church steps where a woman with a shopping cart sleeps with one shoe off. I found a freight elevator in the closed department store that sighs like a living thing. And he found me finding him. He started using my name more often. Once, my name dropped from a parking garage and clattered on the ground like a penny. Once, it rose from a storm drain with the sewer-sweet stink and the wisps of steam that make you think of breath. He used it like a hand on my shoulder. My poor Matthew. Even though only my mother calls me that, and only when she's disappointed. That's what he drank with my voice, the small truth. The things that make my voice not just a sound, but a key to a particular door. There were arguments. Cass told me on the phone, and in texts, because the phone is the opposite of my body, that I was being stupid. "You don't have to be the hero," she said. "Maybe being silent is the brave thing." I texted back, "People get hurt." She sent, "People get hurt if you're dead too." We didn't talk for a few days. When we did again, it was because she heard the voice in the stairwell of the precinct and followed it to the basement, to a mop closet, where a rookie was sitting on an upturned bucket, glass-eyed, listening. She slapped the phone out of his hand, even though there was no phone. He blinked and said, "Jesus," and rubbed his arms, goose flesh rising like he'd stepped from a pool into a cold wind. Like I was going to do what it said. He muttered, defensive. He didn't know what it had said. She asked. He couldn't say. The words were there, not in his memory, but sitting in his muscles, waiting for a chance to express themselves. I started wearing a scarf in July. It gave me something to press against when the sound came, a pressure like a plane landing. The scarf smelled like my apartment, book dust and detergent and onions from the neighbors cooking. And that smell staked me down when a voice tried to lift me away. You want heat? Something combative? I had that too. Hannah's boyfriend found me a week after the alley. He was square in the shoulders and crooked in the nose and had carpenter's hands, rough and unkind. He jabbed a finger into my chest on the sidewalk outside my building, so hard it left a bruise that looked like punctuation. What's your game? He said. She's not even your church. I wanted to say, I saved her life. I wrote. I pulled her away. He read it. He said, from what? With a little hitch, like a man who sees something move in grass and tells himself it's only wind. You say? You don't say anything. He shoved me once more. You want to be a hero? You be one far away from us. He was scared. He didn't know where to put it. He chose me. That's what men do. I wanted to rake my fingernails down his face. I did nothing. That night the voice spoke from the alley again, and I was glad I had a bruise to press the scarf into, something plain as pain to remind me my body still belonged to me sometimes. I am circling. You can hear it. I keep coming back to the same corners like a bad dog. Here's a new one, the storage unit. Because if your voice gets stolen, you start to hide things that don't make noise, potatoes, rope, old photos. You start storing yourself in climate control. It was Cass's idea. If this thing drinks sound and story, she said, stop keeping your story in your apartment where it can sniff it. Put part of you somewhere else. She's a dispatch poet when she wants to be. We drove to a building shaped like a brick, multiplied by a boring imagination. The clerk gave me a unit and a lock and a contract I signed with shaking letters. I put notebooks there, the ones filled with sermons that will never be spoken. I put my baptism certificate. I put a paper bag with a lighter I used to burn things when I was 13 behind the garage. I put the only photo I have where my father looks at me like he recognizes me. It felt like cutting pieces off and putting them in jars, like some future surgeon might sew them back. For a few nights after, the voice stayed away, or I didn't hear it. I slept with my mouth open and drooled on my pillow like a teenager. When it came back, it came from a storage unit hallway, rolling down corrugated metal like a snake's skin. You pack your life in boxes and call it safety. Boxes are coffins that haven't learned how to be useful yet. The padlock on my unit felt warm when I touched it, though the hall air was cold. Inside, the photo of my father lay face down. I hadn't left it that way. My pins had been scattered across the floor like tiny bones. I gathered them on my knees and felt tired the way you feel tired after a long, clean fight where you lost but kept your teeth. Listen, the nights piled. The sirens moved around the neighborhood like wolves, sometimes near, sometimes far. The gaunt man kept pulling my words into shapes that could sell evil like it was a convenience. I did not get my voice back. If you're waiting for a miracle, I don't have one to give you. That's not the story. If you're waiting for me to tell you that I prayed harder and God sent an angel who punched the creature into a sewer, I'm sorry. There are nights I still pray. There are other nights I mouth profanities at the ceiling and make a fist. The roof holds both kinds of words fine. You want what happened last night, the repeat of the alley, the attack, the siren, the official shrug. You already heard that part because I gave it to you earlier. But what you didn't hear was the 5 minutes between the siren and the cops putting me in the car. Those 5 minutes are why I'm writing, because everything that matters in a story of terror happens in the slippages between official moments. He let go, and the black shut like a camera lens. The siren was closer, blood-red lights brushing bricks somewhere. He straightened into himself wrong way, like bones were reversing into sockets. He looked past me at the woman, Hannah this time, and then he looked at me the way a butcher looks at a cut of meat he's already weighed. He said, in his dead leaf whisper, "You preach with words." I preach with the absence they leave. He touched 2 fingers to my throat, almost tender. You make good sound. It makes a good funnel. Then he leaned. He came close enough I smelled the earth damp and paper rot. He said, I was empty a long time. I learned to sip. Now I drink. Someday I will eat. He tilted his head at the world past the alley, at the buildings and the windows and the people who put their faith in elevators and coffee timers. There is so much to eat. He stepped backward and folded into the shadow like he'd always been a seam in the wall. Those words, preach with absence, sat in me like a splinter working its way out. I preached with fullness. I filled air until it rang. He empties air and watches people trip over the echo. He likes voices that people trust because those voices are expensive aqueducts that carry his poison a long way. Back at the station, Cass was there. She came even though she had no reason to be, or maybe dispatchers always have a reason. She looked at me, then at the paperwork mountain, then at my scarf. You're not going to quit, she said. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. So we adjust, she said. We make you harder to drink. We make the city weirder for him. We lay tripwires he doesn't like to step over. I raised my eyebrows at her like, tripwires? She smiled without teeth. Faith is a frequency, she said. You tune people to it. He's tuned to the same band, but he's broadcasting interference. Get a different frequency. She tapped her temple. You have any music in there that isn't you? I knew what she meant. Songs that aren't hymns. Sound that aren't mine. I started carrying a little radio. Not a phone. A crackly cheap radio that pulls stations out of the air like fish out of a river. I listened to traffic reports and farm reports and commercials for furniture warehouses that promise no credit check, and I let them fill the space that used to be warmed by my own voice. When he spoke, the radio would stutter, but it would keep talking. The ads bled into the sermon. It wasn't pretty, but in the edges of those mixed sounds, I sometimes heard him falter, like a song skipping on a scratched CD. He hates when the signal isn't clean. He wants to harvest a single crop. I am tired. You can hear it. I'm not going to apologize. You didn't come here for polish. You came here to be warned. But you also came here to sit next to someone who went into the alley and came back, even if he didn't come back whole. Sit with me a minute. The radiator is rattling. The hallway light is buzzing. Those are good sounds. They belong to the living. There's one more thing. The voice started using my silences. He learned the shape of my breath. He learned where I would have put a pause if I were saying a thing. He left gaps long enough for someone to say amen, even when what he was preaching was cruelty. People do that reflexively. He weaponized reflex. You don't have to put a knife in a man's hand if you can put a habit in his mouth. Last night, after they let me go with the word assault on a sheet and the pity in a glance, I walked home with the scarf tight enough to leave a groove around my neck. I unlocked my door. The apartment smelled like old paper again, and under it the faint tang of the cleaner Mrs. Ramos uses in the hall, lemon and regret. I sat at the table with the packet of exercises and the notebooks and the cheap radio and the flashlight, and I started writing this. I wrote until my hand ached and the side of my little finger smeared black with ink. I wrote the events like stepping stones so I could see how I crossed the water. While I wrote, he spoke not outside, but in the building. He explored new acoustics, the mail slot, the crawl space, the dryer vent, the duct that connects my bathroom to the one above. He said, I tell you, take your comfort like a landlord takes rent, early, often, and with interest. He waited. He left a silence the size of a that's right. No one said it. The radio crackled. A woman's voice sold mattresses that arrive in boxes. He hissed in annoyance, audible to my bones. He will adapt. He will try a new silence, a new cadence. I will keep my radio and my scarf and my sarcastic pen. Cass will keep her number on my phone and her name in my head, the dispatcher who believes. Glenn will keep praying because that's his job and his nature, and somewhere in those prayers I will sometimes find a frequency that isn't all mine, and it will be a good rope to tie myself to when the maw opens again. Here is the last thing I'll give you. and then I'll leave you to your own city and your own alleys. Years ago, on a winter night when the wind cut and the square was almost empty, I preached to 3 men. One was drunk, one was crying, one was pretending not to listen. I talked about a shepherd and 100 sheep and a lost one, and it sounded corny coming out of my mouth, but it made their shoulders lower and their fists unclench. After, the pretending not to listen man came up and said, "You made the air easier to breathe." I thought he meant that literally, the way cold air can hurt your teeth. He didn't. He meant some of the pressure came off his chest. Since the alley, the air often feels like it weighs a pound more per square inch. My windows bow, my lungs push. When he opens his mouth, the pressure drops in a way you can feel in your ears. It's a trick, a physics trick, but it's also an evil trick because it teaches your body to think relief is in the dark. That's why I'm telling you this in the oldest way I know. Story like a hand to hold. If he speaks to you, if my good bell voice, bent like a nail, slides into your ear and tells you mercy is weakness and power is smart, if it makes your chest feel light and your head feel clear and your hands itch, remember pressure. Relief at that price is a loan you can't repay. I'm writing this because I have no other way to speak, and because you might meet him. He isn't only in my alleys. He will take from any open mouth that people trust. He will find a rooftop where neighbors lean out to listen. He will use the gap between what you know is right and what you wish were easy. He will fill that space with something that sounds like permission. So please, I beg you, listen. If you're walking home at night and you hear a voice from a dark street, a voice that sounds impossibly trustworthy, impossibly convincing, a voice that speaks of hope but makes you feel a creeping dread, run. Don't listen. Don't let the words take root. If it slips into your phone, unasked, delete it. If it vibrates the elevator cables, get off on the next floor and take the stairs. If it comes from the vent above your shower, turn the water off and stand there cold and stubborn and alive until it stops. Because it might be a politician's promise or a lover's whisper, or it might be mine.